This episode of Keys to the Shop is brought to you by Prima Coffee. Whether it's espresso machines, manual brewing devices, or general coffee shop needs, they seek to pursue the most innovative coffee products, both domestic and abroad, to offer their customers. Find out more at prima-coffee.com. This is Keys to the Shop, episode 62, a conversation with World Barista Champion Dale Harris of Has Bean Coffee. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools to help you grow as a coffee service professional. I'm really excited to have you here today. Got a great episode in store for you. And right away, I just want to say a big thank you to our sponsor at Keys to the Shop, Prima Coffee. So Prima Coffee is a specialty coffee equipment supplier, and it's based out of Louisville, Kentucky. And ever since they started the company, they have had the goal to make the best coffee brewing equipment available to the general public. The focus they have in that is on curating the best equipment for every need, from grinders to espresso machines to under-counter fridges, pretty much anything you can think of for your shop or even for your own use at home brewing. They have it at Prima Coffee. You can go to prima-coffee.com and check out what they have. They also have a lot of resources to back up the items that they sell. Videos, for instance, that tell you all about the inner workings of both espresso machines and pour-over devices, things like that. You won't be disappointed. And you'll see they put a big emphasis on having the expertise to help their customers get the right gear to fit their situations, every situation that they come across. So go to prima-coffee.com. Check out what they have to offer, email them, call them, ask them your questions. They'd be more than happy to work with you, and I know you'll be happy using them, and I certainly have been over the years. So my thanks to Prima Coffee for their support of Keys to the Shop and also supporting us as an industry by providing us tools we need to do our jobs well. So before we get into our episode today, first off, I want to say a big congratulations to the 6 past guests on Keys to the Shop who have been nominated, either directly or their company that they represent nominated for a Sprudgie. They're in the finalists of Sprudge.com's Sprudgie Awards. And who they are Maxwell Mooney, and Narrative Coffee was one of the finalists for Best New Cafe. Kelly Stein, who was on our last episode 61, for her collected writings. So that's amazing. Colin Harmon, of course, for his book, What I Know About Running Coffee Shops. And we talked to him about that book and his shops. Also, Standart Magazine's Luke Adams. He is the content director, and we had a great conversation with Luke this year. Jared Truby nominated for the podcast Cat and Cloud podcast, and they just do a great job there on that show. And Jared talked to us about growth, and that was a really inspiring episode. And then Mark Michelson, who is the roaster for Onyx Coffee Labs in Arkansas. Congratulations to him for his work in that company for their nomination in the Notable Roaster category. So really proud to have gotten to talk to these really amazing professionals this year, and best of luck to all of them. And in addition to that, this podcast, Keys to the Shop, has been nominated and is a finalist for Best Coffee Podcast in the Sprudgie Awards, which I just have to say thank you to all of you who voted. And thank you especially for just listening. It's my honor and a privilege to get to bring this show and all of these different perspectives from the industry to you all. It's been a really great year. I know I personally have grown a lot since doing this, and I hope you have as well. Now, the final voting rounds are now open at Sprudge.com. I think it's Sprudge.com/vote. I will have a link to that in the show notes. And if this show is a positive element to your career, and if we've made an impact in your life as a barista or coffee service professional. I would really appreciate your votes for Best Coffee Podcast. And so that's the news. And again, I'm just thrilled. So let's get on with today's episode. Today is an episode that in some ways brings us back around from a journey to the farm and back, as we started talking with Hannah Neuschwander of World Coffee Research about the science and research going into the sustainability of coffee and really guaranteeing its future. And then we talked last week with Kelly Stein, who is the host of the Coffea podcast, and also she is that Sprudgie nominee for Best Coffee Writing, her collected works, advocating for the farmer and telling the story of the farmer. We talked about Brazil specifically, but it can be applied, the principles can be applied to any origin, and how we relay the story of what's happening in a country and how important it is to find the right information and not to spread myths, really learn and research and communicate well. And then we get to talk with today's guest about what he says in his routine is building the connection between the sensory experience and the farm is a theme of his routine. And of course, this is World Barista Champion Dale Harris of Has Bean Coffee. So Dale has been in specialty coffee for quite some time. He's been competing for the better part of 9 or 10 years now, and has spent a majority of that time as a finalist in the UK competitions. This year in 2017, got first place, and of course, the same year, he's won World Barista Championship. All throughout the time of his competitions, he has been building the connection between the sensory experience and the farm. It's something he talks about in this conversation as being one of the staple messages that he's wanted to portray, not only to the judges, but to the audience as well. And I think he does it really brilliantly in his routine at the WBC. Dale is the director of wholesale at Has Bean Coffee in the UK, working directly with legendary Stephen Layton of the Tamper Tantrum podcast, as well as In My Mug series, both of which are really worth checking out. One of the things that I really liked about watching Dale's performance and the emphasis on connecting the sensory experience with the farm is the fact that connecting the sensory experience to the farm happens whether we're making an effort to do it or not. And Dale has excellent thoughts on this in our conversation today. Among many other things, we also discuss his routine, the process of using the GCMS, the gas chromatic mass spectrometer that he used to isolate flavors in his extractions and enhance the coffee for his signature drink. Selecting his coffee, he won with a washed El Salvador SL28 coffee, not a geisha. And there's a lot of other stuff that is really valuable in this conversation. I am thrilled to be able to have gotten a chance to talk with him amidst his busy schedule as a newly crowned ambassador for specialty coffee. Now, let me bring you to my conversation with World Barista Champion Dale Harris. Well, hello, Dale. How are you? Welcome to Keys to the Shop.
I'm super well. I'm super happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
From what I understand, life has been turned a little upside down.
Yeah, you could say that. I used to be a barista, and now I am an absurdly titled barista. So,
man, I can't even imagine. There's got to be so many requests, and I'm honored that you're here to talk to us. I really want to know, you've been competing for a long time, but how did you first happen into coffee? Like where did it turn into a career for you?
So this is one of those questions that a few different people have asked, and I hate to say it, but I've never really developed a good answer for why I started working in coffee. I know what the answer is. So I used to, when I was growing up in the UK, the way most people drink coffee, the way I started drinking coffee was instant coffee. It's horrible. It's functional. It's weird moment in my life. when I was 12, 13, I went from drinking instant coffee and thinking it was perfectly fine and, making it for my mom every morning. I started using a filter coffee machine, started using French presses, and that being an important thing, it being a bit fresher, a bit more flavor. I don't think it was good coffee at that point. It was still supermarket bought, pre-ground coffee. But that was probably the beginning of kind of falling in love with coffee. I finished college. I began working in fashion retail, in training people to fold clothes in such a way that customers were more likely to pick it up, in designing stores or service to encourage sales. And I really enjoyed that job. I worked for a brand called Ben Sherman, which it's very tied to kind of the mod movement and ska music and 60s fashion, very kind of positive ideas of being British. So it was an attractive place to work. It was a fun place to work. At some point, that job ended, and I spent a little bit of time unemployed, looking for similar jobs. I found one. I began working for a surfwear company called Billabong, and I managed a retail store for them. I had lots of skills in managing a retail store and a small team, that kind of thing, but I hated the job because I've never surfed in my life. I didn't know. I understood the quality of the products academically, but I had no feeling for them. And I found that a really difficult thing to do. I realized that my skills weren't in sales. They were in talking about things I like with people. So I decided that whatever I did next would be based on something that I loved, that I really enjoyed working with. And throughout all that time, coffee had always been a part of my life. I had progressed from, filter coffee at home to, let's say second wave, syrup-laden lattes and mochas, to maybe drinking black coffee in those places, maybe even drinking espresso, making espresso at home. And I just felt that this is something that I enjoy. This is something with, a rich history, lots of books to read about, where it comes from and the way it involves people. And so I decided I was going to set up a cafe. I was going to not do my job, but to be able to run a cafe of my own, I thought it would be smart to learn some skills first. So I took a job with a chain cafe, working in a store, wiping tables. And because I had experience of managing retail stores and effectively knowing what the bosses looked for, over the next 18 months, I went from, wiping tables in a service station to managing 5 or 6 stores for them in the local area.
Oh, wow.
And then from there, as you progress in your career, you find new opportunities and you move away from, let's say, what's easily available to, to training roles and finding better coffee and whatever. So that was a long answer.
So in the course of time, you came to work at Has Been, and you've been with them for how long?
So the irony is a lot of this is tied to competition. I started working at Has Been in 2010, and my last week of my previous job was the week of the WBC was held in London. Mm. So, Steve has always been a huge competition nut. He found, having had some success in the UK competition was how I first met Steve. He was recording a podcast or video cast at one of the regional heats. We had a little chat. He was friends with friends and was kind of following my path there. And effectively that led to that job offer. So
nice. So competition, you've been competing for a long time and the better part of 10 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, I try not to think about it.
Well, I saw the post that people were putting up on Twitter almost right away after your victory, just the different placements throughout the years. And that is just great tenacity and competition. I've done a little competition myself way back, but It changes you a little bit. It puts you get put through the ringer. And I wonder if you could, through those 10 years of competition, who were you as a barista, as a person, when you first started, and now who are you today after 10 years of doing that?
So I think both the competition, but the people and the situations that competing introduces you to, all of those experiences have shaped me. It hasn't always been super easy and positive, but when you look back across the whole story, or when you have some perspective, for every slightly harder moment, there's a positive lesson in there that you work out in time. I think in terms of who I am from when I started competing and who I am today, when I first started competing, it was very much about developing technical skill. My knowledge of coffee was much more limited. And some of that comes from the time, I think I actually started competing when information about coffee was less available. It was just at the beginnings of, things like Barista Exchange was launched in like 2007, 2008 as a website. There were a few forums out there, but there weren't 150, blogs that you could find every day, or Medium, or as many books. Let's even say good books out there that there are now. So
sure.
Competition was a way of me exposing myself to those different ideas, but it was also the first year I competed, I used a fairly classic commercial espresso blend. It wasn't something that I would choose to drink now, let alone serve to judges. Talking to judges after that first heat, I learned a lot about coffee, or let's say what the conventions were at the time and what was acceptable and what wasn't. And that forced me to progress. That forced me to search out better coffee. It forced me to find out more about coffee. I did okay in my first year, but I was not a great barista. I did not have a strong knowledge of coffee. I just enjoyed making it. And then over the subsequent years, each year, at least some part of me would improve. I'd say at first it was learning to prepare, learning better technical skills, and presenting better. And I was very lucky that I had the ability to present regardless of nerves. Even if I was nervous, I at least had the confidence that talking wasn't difficult for me, even if the content wasn't there. I think, it's developed my access and my approach to coffee. And also each thing I've learned from competition, or each person I've been put in contact with, each routine I've seen that other people have done, they've shaped the things I go on to do in my day-to-day life. But then those influences then shape the routines you develop the next year. And you progressively build your understanding of what it is you want to say about coffee.
Both at the competition level and to your wholesale customers and to who you interact with.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Like when I first began working in coffee and competing, I think I would be guilty of saying things that I'd read or things that I thought were the right answers. And it takes some time for you to learn enough to begin to decide what messages you want to spread are, or what's really important to you.
And what had become important to you over the years, it would just be a wider scope of the industry. Of course, we all start off as baristas fascinated with latte art, and we would have arguments online about convex tampers, all that. Yes, it was an interesting time. But over the course of those years, as you developed personally and professionally, there's probably a lot of ups and downs. Were there times where you really just thought it's just not worth it?
I mean, my competition, I hate to say it, a competition career. My competition career is probably split into two stages. I first competed in 2009. I'd watched a couple competitions the previous years. James Hoffman had won the Worlds in 2007, and I was just moving into coffee at that time. James winning was something that I saw in trade magazines and seemed like a thing that could happen, or there are these competitions and the UK must be pretty good at it. The next year I was working in coffee. I knew the UK champion that year, or I had met him when he was competing. I visited his store in Cornwall. I watched the WBC that year at home on the internet, watching, Stephen Morrissey do really interesting things with his routines. And all of those things led into my first year. I placed, 12th. The next few years, I felt that I progressively got better at the way I made coffee, the way I presented, the coffee I was using, the ideas that I had. And at first, let's say my results reflected that, and then they began to move away from it. So whereas I thought I was improving, I started placing less high and maybe not achieving as much as I expected. And at that time, it was a difficult thing. I felt that was my failure, or I was missing something, or the judges were missing something, and I didn't really understand it. And I think 2013, I didn't compete in the Barista Championships. I competed in the Brewers Cup, but that was more a reaction to the feeling that I thought I got to the end of that journey. And then I saw some of my friends or people that I competed alongside that I really respected. I saw them competing. And as I watched them present, I really felt I'm missing something here. Like I am sad that I am not going through that experience again. Particularly, I watched John Gordon, who won that year. I watched Estelle, both of whom had been in my very first competition, and they had found ways to keep going and keep learning, and they had something to say, and I didn't really feel I had anything to say at that point. But as I watched them compete, I felt, actually, I do have ideas. I do have things that I want to do. And it isn't just about the winning, it's about the whole experience of competing. For me, is a valuable experience. So effectively, my approach to competition was changed by the year that I didn't compete. So those next few years, I felt I had a much more balanced approach to competition, and I felt that I had more to say. And each year, it still remained difficult. You don't always place as highly as you wish, and even you can place highly and not win, and it feels like something is escaping you. But if you can accept the fact that a great deal of what happens in those events is outside of your control, you can work as hard as you want, but if somebody makes better tasting coffee, and the likelihood is someone will always make better tasting coffee than you, somebody is working equally as hard as you, and you can't stop that or control that. But if you can accept that is a separate thing and do the work, follow the thing in your heart or in your head that you want to do, you can progress and you can learn from each experience, and it can be a positive thing.
So sounds like a key for you to turning all of the ups and downs emotionally that you go through into positive growth.
Yeah, I think they don't go away. You still have it's still disappointing when you feel you've worked really hard and you've presented something really well and you don't win a prize or you don't place as high as you'd like. Like it's still sad, and the amount of work doesn't go away either. Some people have spoken to me about, is it easier if you're experienced? And to a point it is. I think the first year you compete, you learn an awful lot. And the second year is so much easier because you understand what the experience is. You understand where technical skills come in, how you need to prepare, and you get better each year at developing your preparation. So you're ready to do the event when the event comes. You don't forget quite as many things. You don't make silly mistakes that are easily avoidable. But the hard work that needs to be done each year, if anything, gets more difficult. You have to find an idea. You have to refine it. You have to you always need to learn how to make coffee, because barista competition doesn't accurately reflect what anyone does in any of their stores. You know, you are making 3 rounds of 4 identical drinks, and I have never worked bar where customers kindly order 4 espresso in a row or anything. And, you know, most shops, the cup sizes are different, or you know, you're making a latte, you're making a cappuccino, you're making whatever, and you can develop those, you know, the smart skills of pulling shots effectively and with good workflow, but it doesn't always translate one to the other. Mm-hmm. I think what you can learn, and some of those ups and downs of going through the competition help you learn, is you can control how you react to the ups and downs, both within a presentation. If something goes wrong, you develop the skill to, okay, well, this has changed, so now I need to react this way. But also, be it the results or be it that things don't go your way because you make a mistake, you learn how to accept that and how to overcome those. And in most cases, the downs and the hard days are more useful than the happy ones.
Oh, that's nice. That's good.
Like it is harder to learn something from the experience of winning than it is from the experience of having made a mistake that you understand and learning how to avoid making that. You have to learn a little bit about, I don't want to say confidence or self-respect. Maybe self-respect is right. You learn to define your value or your abilities yourself, rather than relying on judges or customers or anyone else to define it for you. You're never in control of what other people think of you, but you are in control of how you react to that, how you value yourself. And I definitely think competition as a means of defining your value, you know, did I win, did I not win, is a dangerous thing. But using the experience of competing as a tool to test your skills, to try out new ideas, that's almost always positive.
And it's especially positive when you win the WBC in 2017. I want to talk about your routine a little bit. As you have developed these skills of just security in yourself as a barista and all that comes with it, part of what comes with that perspective of the mature, self-respecting barista is the perspective of a wider industry. And usually thoughts turn to the farm. They turn to the value chain more and more as we progress. And I love here's a quote from your presentation: building the connection between the sensory experience and the farm. How did you arrive at that particular theme, if you will, for your routine?
Part of this is and I hate to, after I've said of all the things you learn from each year as you compete, part of this was a reaction to the fact that wider value chain, and particularly the stories from origin, the story about the farm, I think is, at least for me, is that ultimate factor. It is what defines the flavors that are in a cup. The coffee is defined at that moment it's picked, and the choices the producer has made throughout that, how they process it. Roasting and brewing shape those aspects, but they don't define what's possible in the same way that the farm does, and the plant biology and those kind of decisions. The challenge there is, for 7, maybe not 7 years, for a good 5-6 years, I built my presentations around that idea. I had told a story about a farmer, about a farm. It's the kind of story that I tell when I'm talking about a coffee to my wholesale customers. It's the kind of story I talk if I'm doing an event for retail customers or people drinking coffee or cupping, whatever. You know, that's the story I'm most excited about, is this coffee is special because of what this farmer did. And it adds an element, But there's also always this risk that that story gets lost because people have heard it before. You know, every exceptional coffee I've ever been served has come along with, it's from this country and it's this variety and it's this altitude, and you get given this huge textbook of information without any context to pick through it. And for us, for people who work in coffee, that's a super exciting thing because we can read that information. We know what to do with it. But for a lot of customers who don't understand, let's say, this code, it's just a lot of facts. And they can smile and be vaguely interested, but they just get a cup of coffee and a part of information, and then they're left alone and they don't know how to pick it apart. The one thing that they do get, if it's exceptional coffee, they're going to have a sensory experience. There are inherent qualities in the cup that they will taste, and if that excites them, if there's something that's really stand out there, that might lead them to ask some of those questions about what led to this, what created those flavors. So I wanted to try and build a routine that acknowledged the importance of what happened at the farm, but didn't make that the key piece of information. That actually took it from, this is what you're tasting, this is how and why, and maybe this is where it came from. I think to a greater or lesser degree, one of the myths of barista competition is you have to say why something tastes the way it does, and it's really hard to be honest with that. So we say, you know, this tastes of blackcurrant because of the variety, or this has high acidity because of the altitude, and that's it. And anybody who's tasted a lot of coffee knows that whatever else it is, it's really complicated. You know, there are high altitude coffees that taste amazingly fruity, and there are high altitude coffees that taste amazingly chocolatey, and you can't just put it down to that one factor. Which parts are subjective, which parts are objective. So all of these ideas were floating around my head when we began looking at it. And as we picked apart each one, we found one way of trying to tell that story, or trying to open it up to something a little more complicated.
Oh, is this where the gas chromatic mass spectrometer comes in?
Yeah, that was just a desire to simplify things,
just to make it a little easier for people to understand.
It's a funny thing, because whenever you start thinking about a presentation like this, there are things you do want to do, and there are things you really don't want to do. And one of the things I didn't want to do was make it into a, let's say, a faux science complicated presentation, pretending that I'd, you know, found a new brewing variable, or had realized or understood coffee in a new way. And I didn't want to pretend to be a chemist. But as we were looking for what was subjective, what was objective, what, you know, how do you define what makes a coffee taste the way it does, it actually felt like defining what was in the cup in a completely new way, or in a different way than the way we normally talk about coffees behind bar, whilst being incredibly abstract and feels like it's one layer removed away from what a customer normally experiences, actually enabled us to feel like we were looking at it from another angle. And learning about coffee, because, you know, for me, every competition I've wanted to learn a little more about coffee, or push myself to learn some new things. And this was GCMS is something that's used heavily in food science and understanding flavor. I had a vague idea of what it was and what it could do, and that it could be useful. And being able to take that vague idea, and at the very least, knowing that in 8 weeks' time, I would have learned something about coffee. I'd have a better understanding of this thing, that felt like a definable goal as we progressed, that, I'm going to learn something. That's fun.
So just another tool to add to the quest to understand coffee better. And in this process, well, let me ask this. Did you choose your coffee first and then go this route, or were you inspired the opposite way? How did you arrive at choosing the coffee to subject to the GCMS?
Ultimately, it sounds a little simpler than it was, but I've had this long habit of choosing coffees for competition based on a story that I wanted to tell. So I have competed with coffees that I didn't taste until 2 weeks before the competition, but I have a whole routine built around it, and I'm just waiting for that moment that the coffee arrives from origin on the container, whatever. That it arrives at the roastery. We can immediately roast it. We brew it, and I'm praying that this shot is going to taste good because I've built a whole performance around it. I had some pretty exciting, for me at least, experiences doing things that way. This was my first year to compete at WBC. It felt like from the very beginning that this was a one-off experience, that to achieve to win the national competition would not be something that I could rely on doing ever again. And actually, I felt more comfortable accepting that was my journey, that it had taken me a long time to get there, and this was a happy end, was I became the national champion. It was a really happy thing, and you know what, now I don't need to compete anymore. We just do the Worlds, and that's going to be a great feeling because I get to stand on that stage that has been a goal for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really important to me that if I'm going to have this one chance to do it, that I jump through every hoop that I think is important to doing that properly. One of which is, what the coffee you use has to stand on its own. It has to have exceptional flavor. There's no point standing there with a coffee that you like the story for, but it tastes like a good cup of coffee. So, Steve, who has roasted coffee for my competitions for 7 years, has normally been the guy who tells me that original story. Like, this is why you should choose this coffee. This is exciting. This is coming in. I asked him to prepare a table of coffees for me to cup, of things that he found exciting, things that he really wants to serve, but I gave him some restrictions. So I said that I didn't want to use a natural process coffee because I love naturals, but to a greater or lesser degree, they all taste like naturals. They all have that, or almost all of them have a similar flavor note to a greater or lesser degree. And I find it much harder to taste the origin, the other things that shape the coffee beyond that processing impact. I didn't want to use a Pacamara because I just finished the national competition. I'd used a Pacamara in that one. It was an exceptional, really well natural process Pacamara, but it was really difficult to work with. And maybe 7 out of the 10 shots of espresso I made weren't quite the way that I wanted them to be. And I wanted something a little more consistent, a little more reliable. The other restriction I put on Steve was it has to be a coffee we have in the building, because I'm tired of choosing a coffee and then having to wait and taking these risks or these scary things. And
yeah, stressful.
Yeah, it's super stressful. So his response was, I think you're wrong. I think that's the wrong way to do it because there's this coffee. I'm really excited about it. I think you should compete with it. And I love Steve. I hate him as well. And we effectively had this kind of argument conversation that I wanted to choose my coffee very soon after the national competition because we only had 10, 12 weeks. I had a holiday booked. I very rarely take a holiday. And I had ruined my partner's life for 8, 9 weeks getting ready for the nationals. So I kind of owed it to her. I owed it to me. I wanted to choose the coffee before I went on holiday so that I could spend those 2 weeks just beginning to think about routines. And Steve asked me to wait until I got back because during that time, this container would arrive that had a coffee he was really excited about. So I kind of gave in. It was important. He's always made good decisions with coffee. So it's like, okay, when I get back, we're going to cup these coffees. If it's not there, it's not there. But through my 2 weeks of holiday, Steve sent me maybe a text message or an email every day with a little information about this coffee that he wanted me to serve. And I was trying to ignore it all, not get excited about a thing. He sent me a couple. He was actually traveling at Origin at that time. He was going to Bolivia, but he stopped off in El Salvador and did an interview with the farmer of this coffee that he was really excited about. And I kind of tried to ignore all of these extra inputs. And I got back from my holiday. We cupped these 8 coffees. It was an exceptional table of really remarkable coffees. But there were two that really shone for me that had both, exceptional character, but also the right kind of balance that I felt that when I ran them through an espresso machine, there would be great quality there and something that would make a great espresso. And of course, they were both effectively the same coffee. They were both washed SL28s from Las Brumas. One of them was the micro lot I ended up using. The other was the standard lot, but they were the coffee that Steve had been telling me all these stories about. So I don't know whether he played me or whatever the thing was, but like he knew the right coffee before I did, but I felt that I had to go through those hoops. I had to choose it based on flavor rather than story. I think to a point, almost every coffee has a story and has these kind of lessons or differentiating factors. If you can find the right angle, the challenge is finding a coffee that can stand on its own and have that balance without that information, because whilst it shapes the way the coffee tastes, there's also the danger of it being smoke and mirrors that raise your expectations of a cup or threaten to disappoint if the cup doesn't quite deliver.
So this is a coffee that stood on its own, and it's from El Salvador, correct?
Yeah. So it's from a farm that we've actually worked with the farmer for, I think, 8-9 years now. Actually, maybe longer. Maybe 2008 was the first year Steve bought from Ernesto. It was a Cup of Excellence lot. Ernesto owns a farm called La Illusion, which produced the coffees that won the 2011 WBC when brewed by Alejandro, the Salvadoran champion. Ernesto took some of the money that he earned from Cup of Excellence victories and from selling coffee following that year, and he bought a farm called Finca Las Brumas, which is incredibly high up on the Santa Ana volcano. And he planted this farm, let's say, as an intentionally quality focused farm. So growing specific varieties, different areas with different soil conditions. Everything was built based on his beliefs of what grows the best coffee. And it was a long, slow, and expensive process. I think this is the second year we've had these varieties from that farm. The first year that we'd had the wild forest lots. It's both an accurate reflection of the quality that El Salvador can produce, but also this coffee has, or this farm has conditions that are slightly different to a lot of farms in El Salvador. So it's kind of a combination of what's possible there, but also what's possible in perfect conditions, with a lot of care and control.
So when you present the fruit of all that hard work as a barista and that coffee stands on its own, to my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, even with a great story, if the coffee doesn't stand on its own, from a consumer's standpoint, they're probably not going to buy it, which in the end is going to affect the farm negatively in the long run. So focusing on marketing the way we do, we tell a story and we rely on story to sell things to people. But like you said in the beginning of our talk here, the one thing that people are going to have is a sensory experience, even if they don't remember the story. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I think I think some people enjoy those stories. Some people find those stories, and I think to a certain degree, I do. I think I find those stories attractive to when I am buying anything. I'm much more excited about, let's say, the idea of seasonal veg and, a restaurant that's serving things with great provenance, and I can understand those stories better. That will lead me so far. And I embrace those ideas. I find them really exciting, but I'm just one kind of customer. And there are lots of other kinds of customers that doesn't work for, that isn't as exciting, maybe because they don't want to hear it or because they've heard it too many times before and they've been disappointed.
Sure.
And, to a greater or lesser degree, Starbucks tell that story. They talk about the difficulty of growing coffee. They talk about how refined the product they are serving is and how it's at a certain level of quality and they pay more for whatever. But the sensory experience, the way the flavors in exceptional coffee, if they're going to be worth that extra money, if they're going to be worth the customer walking past, 5 other cafes to come to yours, they have to deliver in the cup as well. There has to be something that tastes different. And I think all of us in the specialty coffee community believe, and I'm not 100% sure we're right, but we believe that there are qualities inherent in the cup that people will pay more for. Mm-hmm. And that if people will pay more for it, that's a good thing for us in our cafes, but also we can take some of that value and share it with the producers to help them produce more coffees that have those characteristics or similarly interesting characteristics.
Excellent. Yes. And your identification of the flavors originally through traditional cupping, and then you took those qualities of the coffee and you enhanced them, going back to the GCMS. I mean, how did that work to really take this particular coffee and enhance it with this machine and with your own palate?
So part of it is, let's say I think we all believe there are inherent qualities in the cup that are objective. There are flavors there, and maybe we don't all interpret them the same way, but there is some value there. It's really difficult to define. The experience of drinking coffee, and if I say sensory experience, to a point, I mean those qualities and how people interpret them, but I also mean there's a wider experience there that has the potential to add value, be that, in competition, the presentation you give and the context you give for that coffee. But let's say in a cafe, and in the competition as well, the serving where you use, the music that's on, the ambience in a cafe, but also beyond ambience, the way you present that coffee or impact the experience that the customer has. There are these extraneous factors that have the potential to shape how someone interprets the coffee. When we try and focus on the inherent characteristics only, we're making this huge supposition that there is objective quality, that there is such a thing as objective quality. But we measure it in such a subjective way. Oh, we taste this and I'm getting this. Do you get this? Well, you're wrong. Or maybe you're right and I'm wrong. So when I began thinking of the GCMS, that offered just an alternative way to see whether there were inherent differences between these different coffees, between these different lots. I could look at that test or using that tool very honestly, and I knew that it wasn't the same as the sensory experience someone experiences in the mouth. You taste a coffee and it's not just the aromas you experience, but it's the balance between aromas, it's the temperature of the drink, it's the physical sensation of it hitting your tongue, and the sweetness and salt content and all those things influence what we describe as flavor. But the GCMS, much like a refractometer, if you use that to measure your extractions, it's an objective measurement of some factors that influences what that customer is going to experience or what that judge is going to experience. So I was in a lucky position that I knew a few people who knew a few people that could introduce me to Gloria and Ian at the Division of Food Sciences at the University of Nottingham. They have, as part of one of their campuses, they have a crop sciences area and they have a food sciences area with all the toys and all the tools that, the R&D department of, a multi-billion-dollar coffee company would dream of having. So they have access to thousands of students who are willing to sit in special tasting booths to taste things. They've done experiments involving, how much salt is just the amount of salt to have on a potato chip to influence flavor or have a great experience, or how much crunch is enough crunch in an apple. Gloria is a PhD student who's working specifically in coffee, looking at, she's worked on, designing methods to identify roast defects in roasted coffee, certain chemical markers that would help you understand that this roast was under roasted because it exhibits this chemical in this test, rather than you having to rely on someone tasting the coffee and telling you it's bad. She's doing research at the moment in actually removing negative flavor characteristics in Robusta coffee through a separate treatment, almost like decaffeination. It's super interesting.
Wow, it is interesting.
I'm really excited about the work they're doing, and I'm very aware that is real science that will change, that has the potential to change the way coffee is produced or made or sold. And what I was doing was not really science. It was, you've got a cool toy. Would you help me use it so I can better understand my coffee a little bit? So I used rather than doing an effective scientific experiment, which is really difficult, I used a scientific tool to analyze 4 different extractions of coffee. We tried to do it very rigorously and very professionally, but we did this analysis. Gloria helped us separate the results, and regardless of anything else, and regardless of the information I ended up using in the presentation, I was able to say, well, this objective measurement shows there are differences between these 4 shots of espresso. And I can correlate those differences with differences in the roasted coffee used. Maybe some of them are tied to roast, some of them are tied to the extraction, but some of them appear to be tied purely to origin. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. It harkens back to what you were saying before, and how we describe something as being a result of, that black currant is a result of the elevation, and it's really where we stop, because there is a complexity below all of it. But
I mean, it's something that I hope I have an opportunity to work a little more closely, and with less of a coffee making competition and the needs of that competition defining how we go through the experiment. It's definitely something I'd like to do again with similar coffees, because and one of the joys of working for Steve and for Has-Been is we have these great long-term relationships with farmers who are really excited about trying different things with coffee. So we have a lot of coffees that are the same picking but separated to be processed different ways, or the same variety grown in the same soil. A different variety grown in the same soil, or the same variety grown in different soils within the same farm. So we have all these minor differences in coffee. We believe there are these objective differences in the way they taste, but using this method to define those differences a little more, I think there's more work to be done there. I think there are more lessons that we can learn from it.
So now, through this process, you have effectively presented the coffee, the sensory experience, in a way that's connected to the farm, like the goal of the routine was. Now, when you're watching this routine, when the average barista or coffee professional is watching this routine, what is it that you hope they can walk away with that they can apply to their careers? Like, how do you want this to inspire them?
I mean, this is tied to a big question that lots of people have asked me, or other questions people have asked, in that, like, Certainly, magazines or interviews have asked about certain elements of what I did, and it's interesting to see which ones they feel were important in the routine, or which things get that kind of attention. And sometimes, I mean, we will see in a year or so what actually becomes part of the culture, or if anything does. But for me, I think there are a couple of things there. There are things that I would like. I use a real baristas, unlike people like me. People who work bar every day, people who do service. There are different lessons I would hope that they would take from it than competition baristas, or baristas presenting themselves in a way. I think for competition, there are very specific things I hope people get from it, which is, a lot of what I did not follow the conventions of what we expect a barista competition to be. And I don't think it is the details of what I did that are important. It is the fact that there is no convention you need to follow. You don't need to talk about the farm first. You don't need to sit the judges in a certain position. You don't need to play certain music, or particularly you don't need to use a geisha to win the competition. It doesn't need to be a natural processed coffee. Like, you don't need to spend, and I'm not going to pretend that I didn't invest money and time in this, but you don't need to have 20 people working on this full time to win. What you do need to do is have something you want to talk about and be honest about what you love in coffee. And the judges and the rules of the competition are actually really, really open to almost anything, as long as you put in the work and you deliver great drinks as part of that.
Great.
I think for real baristas, for somebody working behind bar, working with customers, I think that acknowledging that there are other ways to reach out to your customer about your coffee beyond just what it tastes like. Some customers respond really well to, you make exceptional coffee, you put it in front of them, they taste it, they get it. And that's great. And I wish we all had more customers like that, because they're easy.
Unicorn customer.
Yeah. Who always says the same thing and is really boring to work with. Like, customers come in and they all come from different places along their coffee journey. And let's say the origin story or a lecture about what specialty is only valid with some customers. There are other ways we can shape that message. There are other things we can do to help different kinds of customers have a different experience. And I think for most baristas working in a shop, or for most shop owners, what you really want is someone to come in and notice you as doing something different, or notice your shop as special, as unique, so that they come back. And I think, part of my routine was having a sensory play set with different aromas and different compounds within it. And I'm not sure that that's something I would want to experience in a shop. Certainly it's probably not something I want to experience every morning at 8 a.m. But there are some customers who, are never going to have had that kind of experience. And actually that's a super fun thing. I think signature drinks in barista competition or in a shop can actually be a really interesting way of introducing some of the ideas behind specialty to people who aren't yet used to them, or who haven't seen them before. I think just having information written on a blackboard behind you when you make coffee is not enough, and that is only suitable for some people. So being open to new ways and trying to develop new ways of talking about coffee is always going to be positive for a store, for a bar.
Yeah, absolutely. Just tracking with you there, because every customer who comes in has a particular set of needs that they're revealed as you get to know them throughout the time of their patronage at your store. And to presume that one particular answer is the right answer or the right method because it happens to be one that you're passionate about really leaves a lot. It leaves a lot on the table in terms of what you could get out of that relationship.
I mean, for me, there are things that I believe are important. I do have particular, values that inform the way I talk about coffee. But I don't think it's our job when we're working behind bar to tell people what matters. But if we can put them in a place where they are interested, where they're excited enough to sometimes ask, like, why are you doing this thing? Or why does this taste like this? If we can give them reasons to ask the questions, that suddenly gives us that permission to share some of our thoughts. And some of this, is going to things like permission marketing and stuff like that, that if we can get people to want to work with us on this, you're suddenly in a super happy place. Whereas if you are trying to dictate the way these conversations happen, you're not going to bring people with you. Sure. You're just going to alienate them. And you don't just alienate them from your shop, you alienate them from all the people who are doing a good job, who are trying. I hate to say that we're all kind of ambassadors, but we are. Like, everybody making or proposing that they are making specialty coffee or better coffee has some responsibility to the rest of our community, to other baristas, to farmers and other parts of the value chain. If you're going to define the coffee experience for a customer, you have to do it well. And every time you lose a customer by not taking into account their needs, that's a potentially bad thing for coffee. You're spreading that message that, it's not for everyone. It's a hipster. If you don't get it, you're not part of the cool club kind of thing. That suddenly became a rant.
It's very appropriate. And I love the sentiment that we are all ambassadors, because the customer only knows us and we represent specialty coffee. And if you don't have a good answer for anything from the price of your coffee or the origin or different questions any customer might have, educated or otherwise, then you risk them losing confidence in the legitimacy of your position as a specialty coffee professional, which is already in question by many people.
There are many challenges there already. And, I also think, and at different parts of my career, I've been asked questions I don't have the answer to. And trying to answer the questions that you don't know the answer to is never a good thing. But being honest and saying what you do know or why you don't know a thing is an equally valid answer. Part of when you taste a coffee and, you find those flavor notes that you believe in and talking about those with a customer, I think there's this huge potential to, instead of saying, I taste this, and if you don't, you're wrong, being able to say, well, I taste this, what do you taste? And that kind of open approach to tasting, but also information and knowledge and not needing to know everything, but being interested in those things and those questions in an open way. That's where I want all my baristas to be, or the baristas that I work with. I would be really excited, or I am, I'm often very excited to work in an industry where baristas don't know all the answers, but they're interested in the questions and they're talking about them with their customers. I think that's one of the few things we have that are really positive about our community.
Amen. Always learning. And as we are all ambassadors in our shops, you are the official ambassador for specialty coffee. And so what is it that, as World Barista Champion now, what do you feel like? This is one of the topics, obviously, that we've just been talking about, but what are some of the pressing items that you think the specialty coffee, in particular coffee, those of us who work in service and coffee service, should be focusing on?
So I guess to a point I answered part of that with the last answer. We need to avoid the cliches of what it is to work in a coffee bar, or just doing what works for someone else. There are cafes that do certain things really well. And if you're about to set up a cafe or you're working behind bar, you don't need to do what they do. You can do whatever you want. And as an individual, I'm much more excited. I may get to travel or go to different coffee bars now. And I don't want to, go to a different country and have exactly the same coffee experience I have, here in London or elsewhere in the UK. I'm really excited to have different coffee experiences wherever I go. Ones that are ones that are tied to particular stores or particular people or particular communities. Because coffee isn't just one thing, and customers aren't just one thing. I think there's a separate, not completely separate, but there's a real issue about connecting the higher price of specialty coffee with actual value for the customers.
Sure.
And different styles of service, different experiences add to that. But that throughout my career in coffee, trying to give reasons to customers to pay a little more for coffee, but also undermining those reasons. Well, sorry, not undermining, but supporting those reasons with more than just you should pay more because it's better, or because we're paying more, so you should pay more. I don't think that's a strong argument or one that's worked in the past. So we need to find other ways of encouraging people to spend more on coffee, because at the moment there remains this. When I first started working in coffee, people didn't pay enough for green coffee. Farmers were in a bad position, and conditions have changed. Climate change continues to be an issue. Leaf rust in, El Salvador. All of these issues are still out there, and we're still talking about the problems that we had 10 years ago, that, we don't charge enough for coffee. We don't pay enough for coffee. There isn't quite enough coffee out there. So if we're going to fix these issues, we actually need to start doing it. We need to give reasons for customers to spend more. We need to pass some of that value back, and we need to find new ways of talking about them so that they continue to be relevant, and not just, every coffee drinker is aware that there is, sustainable economic coffee, and that there are problems with most of it, kind of thing. The narrative hasn't changed in 20 years. So we need to keep working on that.
And presenting that value and connecting the sensory experience to the farm is an ongoing thing. And I think just hearing you describe things in this conversation today and your routine, I feel is a great way to get inspired and motivated to continue to do that. So thank you. And what is it that you're excited about now? What's next for you?
What I'm excited about, in a very selfish way, I suddenly have lots of opportunities out there for me to travel, for me to learn new things in different environments. And I'm definitely excited by those opportunities and by a chance to travel, and having a little bit of fun as I do it. I suddenly have, I've competed for the last, 8-9 years. Every year I've spent, 3 months in a cold room somewhere, brewing shots of espresso and tasting them, and, brewing more shots of espresso and tasting them. So now I've suddenly got, 3 months of my life back, or I'm kind of wondering how I'm going to fill that time.
Just go to a warm place and brew espresso.
Yeah, possibly. But there's most of my career in coffee, part of each year has been shaped or tied up with barista competition. And, a little bit of me is sad that maybe that won't be the case. Maybe there's a different competition or a different thing that I will fill that time with, or maybe there are better things I can do with that time. Mm-hmm. In terms of, the bigger picture, what I'm going to do this year, or which of those trips I might actually take. I'm probably going to be a bit boring, and people might feel let down. All these opportunities will be there. Maybe I won't take them all because, I have a day job that I quite like. I'm quite good at. I have, house partner, dog. I have my kids, and, the stability that those things give me are actually, part of what's enabled me to do the learning and do the exploration in my own time. So I'm not looking for any huge changes, but we'll see what comes, and I'll try and be open to the experiences and opportunities as they arise. And
excellent. Yeah. Well, I respect that greatly, first things first kind of thing. And your day job actually in the long run, that is the kind of thing that produces the kind of change we've just been talking about. And,
like the competition puts a lot of focus on, the moment or those 15 minutes or the results, but the things that, and I've had the privilege of knowing a few other world champions. The UK's had a couple, really impressive people in James and Gwilym. I know a little bit of a few of the other champions who've won, and I think the thing that unifies most of them is actually they're not just defined by those 15 minutes. They've spent years doing, working on improving brewing, but spending time with different baristas and learning new things, working at Origin, working on, James has produced his blog, and Square Mile is, an internationally renowned roastery, and the other projects he's involved in. And, all those other aspects to each of those people are part of what put them in that position, but they're also arguably more important to what we think of them now. So I'm kind of hoping that in 10 years' time, I'll have done some other incredible things as well, that this will just be one of the fun things we did along the way.
Well, I absolutely think that you will. And how can people stay in touch with you as that 10-year plan unfolds? Where can we, how can we find you? What can we connect with you?
I think I keep an eye on my Instagram.
Okay.
In half hour after winning the competition, I doubled the amount of followers I had on Instagram, and then a few hours later, it was 4 times as many. And I'm very aware that I'm gonna have to up the quality of photos I take and the the way I curate or choose with what I post there, but. I think that's a fun and easy way that I do things. And, with a little luck, I'll be able to talk to you again in the future and other, podcasts and interviews, and hopefully people will stay interested in what I'm doing, or I will find something for them to be interested in.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today, talking about coffee and just inspiring us to, be ambassadors ourselves. It was really a joy to talk to you.
It's my pleasure, Chris. Keep doing what you do and talking to the people.
Well, amongst all of the points of conversation today with Dale, a few things really stood out to me that I think would be worth reiterating, and that is the idea of constant learning, where Dale was talking about how each time he does a competition, he just wants to learn a little bit more about coffee. And that is a worthy goal. I think it's both a humble goal, but it's also a pretty lofty goal at the same time. But that's what a good coffee career is made up of. And in Dale's competition career, as he goes from, routine to routine and discovers more about coffee, it adds value to his day job, where he advocates for specialty coffee to his wholesale customers with has-been. Arguably, one of the most important positions we can have is the position of our day job. Whether we're a champion or not, we are a champion for specialty coffee in our own rights, in our capacities, and we serve in our stores, in our roasteries, etc. The Specialty Coffee Association says that the World Barista Champion is an ambassador for specialty coffee. Like, that's the goal of the competition, is to find an ambassador for specialty coffee. And what I'd love for us to walk away with here today, amongst all of the other great things, is the idea that you and I, no matter what we do, are ambassadors for specialty coffee. And it's a bit cliche to say it because we say it so much. Maybe this is your first time hearing it, and for me and anyone who's been in competition or around the third wave specialty coffee movement, it's kind of an old saying and it loses its meaning. But if we really think about it, who is we in the We Are All Ambassadors? It's any of us who are directly representing, either through making drinks or talking about specialty coffee to customers. And with that understanding, I think for me, one of the most important things that Dale said was at the end of this conversation. Dale was explaining that his championship year may be a bit boring, quote unquote. It wouldn't necessarily be filled with tons of travel. It might not take as many opportunities as were available to him. And his reasoning for this, the reasons behind it, I feel like are one of the things that would really drive our industry forward if more of us thought this way. And this is just my opinion, I think, but the idea of being rooted down into your current roles and current responsibilities and opportunities well, and being able to invest into those things. He's talking about how, he has his wholesale customers, he has his home life, and those are things that he's deeply invested into. And to my mind, those are things that done well really can move the needle on specialty coffee and do it sustainably. So whether you're working a shift as a barista or managing a store or starting your own business, the day in, day out responsibility of being an ambassador for specialty coffee is something that, whether recognized with a title or not, will indeed change the future of coffee. And I feel inspired by talking to Dale because his presentation of specialty coffee through this conversation and through his competition routine was at once elevated and also grounded. I hope that this was inspirational to you as well. And my thanks to Dale for taking the time to sit down and talk with us about these things at Keys to the Shop. If you want to know more about Keys to the Shop, you can go to keystotheshop.com. There you can find all of our past episodes and show notes. You can also sign up for an email newsletter, which will deliver the show notes to your inbox on a weekly basis. In addition to the show notes, there will be also fun links to cool articles that are relevant to your development in specialty coffee, news or research, culture, HR, things like that. So that will come up when you get to the site. So a little window will come up there. You just enter your email and that will be sent to you. So really convenient. If you want to reach out to me, it's chris@keystotheshop.com. Pretty simple. And again, I would remind you that the Sprudgies are live right now taking votes for the best coffee podcast amongst many other categories in the Sprudgies. So go vote for your favorites. Your vote for Keys to the Shop would be super appreciated. And again, I just really appreciate all of you who are supporters of the show and listeners, and I strive to create a better podcast each time for you and do my part to help specialty coffee just continue to grow into the future. Thank you for spending time with us today. I truly do hope that this episode has given you keys to the shop.